Number 1. The Well. I don't really recall ever doing anything particularly creepy or scary when I was a kid. I bring this up because I've read a bit of stories about creepy things children do or say, and also I bring it up because my daughter did something creepy a few years back that still haunts me to this day. This may sound harsh, but I don't believe in supernatural things. I know that a supernatural answer would explain things a lot easier than another answer might, but I just cannot bring myself into believing those things without direct and empirical evidence. Kids have vivid imaginations, plus they interpret things differently than adults often do, and this can explain a lot of the odd things that children do and tell you. Getting on with the story though, I have one daughter. She's 13 now, but this happened when she was 8 years old. I also have to tell you that she does not enjoy watching horror movies. She won't even listen to scary stories on YouTube when I do. So if this was something that was totally in her head, I cannot explain where the idea came from. This occurred on an early fall day. I remember the leaves falling down quite steadily, and there was a nice cool breeze. My daughter, Terry, wanted to go out and play. I had made sure that she had a jacket on and told her to remain in the yard, where I would be able to see her. This was never an issue with her, so I wasn't concerned. While I was doing housework though, I did happen to glance up out of the kitchen window in the backyard. I did not see Terry back there. This was not immediately a concern, however, as she might have been in the front yard. I was still sure she wouldn't leave the yard without permission, so I was not concerned. I went into the living room and checked the front yard, noticing that she was not out there either. Although I was not yet concerned, I did decide to go out and check the side yards. There wasn't an easy way to see them from inside the house, but before I did that, I called for Terry to see if she had come back into the house. I didn't get any response from her. Walking outside, I checked all around the house and was not able to find my daughter anywhere. She was not in the house. She was not in any of the yards. We had a forested area around our house that was fenced off with a wooden fence, but she wasn't supposed to go beyond the fence. And Terry was very aware of this, and she never went beyond that fence. I was concerned then, because one of the major reasons that we didn't want her wandering out of the yard was because there was an old well in the forested area. And although Terry knew about this, and she knew very well she was not supposed to leave the yard to go into that area, sometimes children do things that are simply and completely spurred on by curiosity. They do these things even when they are well aware that they shouldn't. I of course called for Terry a lot, but I didn't get any response. I called out at different parts of the yard of the house before going out to explore them at all. However, when no response was coming, I had to then go out and check the forest. Of course I went over to where the old well was at first. If there was any chance that my daughter had gone that direction, or if anything had happened, it would be the most dangerous area for her to have been in. However, before I was able to get to the well, my daughter approached me in the woods. She was walking towards me from the direction that the well was in. I felt a big mix of relief and concern, since although Terry was okay, it was now practically confirmed that she was out at that well too. But it was the concerned look on my daughter's face that bothered me the most. I fired a few questions at her through my own panic. I felt silly throwing all that information out at her, but I was really concerned. The only question that seemed to get through to my daughter, though, was why she was hanging out there by the well. She knew she wasn't supposed to go anywhere near it. "It's because of the little girl," Terry told me. I cannot tell you the combination of being chilled and confused that immediately struck me with those words. When I asked her what girl she meant, her response was even scarier. "It's the little girl who lives down in the well." I asked what she meant, and she told me that it was the little girl in the well that called her over to the well. I didn't wait for her to elaborate. The first thing that I thought was that there was some girl who fell into the well and called out to Terry for help. Based on this information, I ran quickly over to the area where the well was. Crawling down into the well, I tried to see if there was a little girl in the well, but as I called out, I got no responses. I, of course, thought the worst. I just thought that the little girl had to have fallen into the well, and now was unconscious, or even dead. I tried quickly to decide if I should run to the house and call 911, or if I should remain there and try to wake the girl up. Turning to Terry, I asked her what the girl in the well had told her. When had she fallen in the well? Giving me a very odd look, Terry shook her head. "She didn't tell me she fell in the well," my daughter informed me. "She lives in the well. She wanted me to climb down and play with her." I have never, before or since, heard such a terror-inducing thing from a child. I was not able to determine that anyone was in the well. I don't really believe in ghosts either, as I mentioned, but I also find it hard to chalk something like that up to a young girl's imagination. I really don't know. All I could do in this instance was tell her that she must never, under any circumstances, go back to that well, and no matter what she hears, she should never climb into it. I explained how dangerous that would be. I didn't let her out of my sight for a long time either. To my knowledge, she never went back to that well. I also have no explanation for what happened. Number 2. Walking home. Ever since he was 10 years old, I began driving my son to and from school. The school is not very far away, and all the students live in town, so there is no bus system for the students. The vast majority of students just walk to and from school every day. It's just normal. And up until he was 10 years old, my son Tony also walked to and from school. However, there was a very disturbing experience that happened to him when he was 10 that convinced me to never let him make that walk again. Tony has always been a positive kid. He had friends in school and he takes part in after-school activities. Nowadays he is in high school and he plays sports at school. He doesn't like the fact that I drive him to and from school now because he would rather walk home with his friends, but I just cannot allow that to happen. I mentioned Tony being a positive kid, but around the time he was 10 years old, he came home from school and seemed pretty depressed. I was not too overprotective at the time, and I knew that kids sometimes get depressed, so I didn't really address it at first. However, it went on for several days, and when it did, I finally had to address it. When I asked Tony what was wrong, he insisted that nothing was. When I pressed him on it, he became uncharacteristically upset with me and insisted that nothing was wrong. I obviously did not believe him. Something was obviously wrong, but I didn't want to continue to press him if he wasn't ready to talk about it. I also figured that it could have just been a mood swing or something, and that it was quite possible that nothing really was wrong. He may have not known why he was in a bad mood. This bad mood, however, went on for nearly 2 weeks, and at that point I just couldn't let it drop. I was very concerned about my son and had to know what was going on. His dad and I talked about it, and although I normally did all the major parenting stuff, and being a stay-at-home mom, he and I confronted our son together. We figured that would be the best way to get him to admit what was going on. Finally, with both of us talking to Tony, he told us why he was in a bad mood. A couple of weeks before, on the way home from school, he crossed through a playground that he always crossed through. It was normally empty that time of day, but there was a young man on the merry-go-round. When he saw my son walking through the playground, he got up and ran over to him. Apparently, the man started talking to Tony about some pretty disturbing things. He told him stories about violent acts he had committed, and even told Tony he had murdered someone recently. He had gotten away with it, as no one had suspected him of the murder, but he felt he had to tell someone about it, and he figured that a 10-year-old boy would be the perfect person to tell, because no one would believe him. Tony asked the man to leave him alone, but this only made the man more persistent, in telling Tony some more awful things. When Tony threatened to tell his parents and have them call the police, that was when the man said the scariest thing of all. He told Tony that if he ever told anyone what was said, he would go to our house, kill both of his parents while Tony had to watch, before killing Tony himself. And when Tony didn't believe him, the man pointed out that he had already killed someone and gotten away with it. He would be able to do it again. Apparently, this man got some thrill out of tormenting my son going forward. He would be there in the playground the next few days. When my son tried to walk a different way home, the man went to the school the next day and waited for him to leave. On these walks home, he would grill my son to make sure he hadn't told anyone what he had been told. And when my son confirmed that he hadn't, the man would tell him all sorts of gruesome ways that he would torture me and my husband in front of Tony. I mean, the things that Tony told me that came from this man were shocking. I don't really want to repeat them all, but they involved things like skinning us alive and piercing our eyes with sewing needles. My husband drove to school the following day and watched as a man approached my son after school. He confronted the guy, and that is the nice way of putting it. The man was arrested, but his murder story was never confirmed. He spent no time in jail. Ever since then, I have driven my son to school and home every day, and I will keep doing that until he goes off to college. Number 3. Hide and seek. The worst thing that ever happened to me happened to my son when he was 11 years old. We lived on military base housing. This was in the early 1980s. It was not unusual at all for the time, and for the area, to allow kids to play out at night. There was a strong and very close-knit community, and always large groups of children playing. It wasn't unusual to have up to 30 children playing hide and seek or tag or something. In addition to the time and community, this also made it common and seemingly safe to let your children play outside after it got dark. We never really thought about it being dangerous. This was a normal summer evening, and my son Bobby was outside playing with the other kids in the area. They had been out for several hours playing hide and seek, or as they called it, hide and go seek. It was a large crowd of kids as usual. They were playing for hours, and continued to play after it got dark. Bobby is a competitive guy nowadays, and he was very much like that when he was a child too. In playing hide and seek, he was always determined to not be found, and he was always determined to do whatever it took to not be caught, and forced to be it. My husband and I were watching television when our other son came home. He was a bit frantic and told us that Bobby was missing. We asked to elaborate. He told us that about an hour earlier they were playing a round of hide and go seek, and every single kid had gotten to base except 2. One was caught and was it. The other child was Bobby. They called for Bobby to come out of hiding, but he didn't come. After calling for him several more times, they combed the area, calling for him and searching for him. No one was able to find any trace of him at all. So my husband went out to search for Bobby while I called the housing security. The military housing had their own police force. This was another reason we didn't worry when the kids were out playing late. They reacted quickly and went searching for my son. That night, no one found Bobby. Any parents hearing this story could understand how he felt. The absolute terror that pervaded our minds and bodies was unlike anything we had experienced before, or really since. We thought the worst. We thought it was more than possible that Bobby was dead. And that is a feeling and a thought that no parent should ever have. The following day, we got a phone call from the police. They had found Bobby. That was the good news. But what happened to him was pretty scary. While playing hide and seek, Bobby had gone behind a fence and had the misfortune to come across a couple of drug addicts. One of them overdosed and had died, and the other was freaking out. When he noticed Bobby, he worried even more, scared that Bobby would call the police and he would get arrested. The living drug addict abducted Bobby. He taped my son up and threw him in the trunk of his car, and he left him there. It was the following day that my son, still in the trunk of the car, that the moron decided to drive somewhere, and he was pulled over for speeding. Bobby, aware that there was a police officer there, made enough noise in the trunk to get the officer's attention. The man was promptly arrested for kidnapping. Of course, the man was not honest about his intentions for Bobby. It doesn't make sense that he would have been, because it would have likely gotten him much more jail time. However, this was only a couple of years after Adam Walsh had been kidnapped and decapitated, so we of course expected the worst. Fortunately, the man was an idiot. He was convicted of the kidnapping and another charge related to the death of the other drug addict. I don't know what happened to him after that. Bobby is in his 40s now and lives quite a happy life. I do sometimes get scared, thinking it could have been very close to not happening. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you haven't checked out my sister Evil Black Cat's recent cooking videos, please take a look at them. I will link them both in the description. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.